So system design is a very vast topic. And if you are someone who's just trying to figure out um, what are the most important skills there, right, that you want to learn first. Because, I mean, to really learn system design, it's going to take you time. It's going to take you months, maybe years to really get a good handle on it. And sometimes it's important to understand what are the top things that you should prioritize and make sure that you're good at them sooner rather than later. So essentially, that's what I've done. I've created a list of top 5 system design skills that, in my personal experience, I think as an architect or as a senior engineer, you use most frequently. And if you're not good at it, then the mistakes that you make have a much larger impact. So these are top 5 in my mind. It may not be exactly what, if you're preparing for interview, then people may assess you. I would personally assess you on these things. But I know there are a lot of places the interview is more around concepts that you may not really use in real world. So yeah, so that aside, I mean, these in my mind are the most important ones that you'll really apply and you have to keep on applying and being really good at. So the first one I think is essentially that you should be very good at understanding the user and use cases for the system that you're trying to build. Now, very often people think this is a requirement that should come from product. But in my experience, over a period of time, you will end up in situations where either there is no product or the product is new and doesn't have a very strong sense, and you will have to do this. So if you're an architect, you have to really understand the goal of the system or the product and really understand all the users and use cases. A lot of times people will miss out on use cases and then you go to production and then you realize something is really broken. So really going deep, understanding the user, understanding the use cases is a really, really important skill for an architect. The second thing that I think that's very important is this ability to break a core functionality, a use case into components that will basically make this use case come to life. And this decomposition has to be based on single responsibility. It's probably one of the most important principles in system design. And if you can do this well, then any mistakes you make downstream, the impact is going to be much less. But if you do not decompose systems well, you can end up into situations, you end up with a monolith, or you can end up in a situation where you have just too many services and there's a service problem and you don't know what to do with it. The third skill that's very important is essentially identifying the best fit database for your component. And I've intentionally used the best fit term because there are lots of databases around. And sometimes what we pick is what we are most comfortable with. But you really need to have a breadth in terms of have an understanding of what are the various strengths of each database and then pick the one that you think is the best fit for your specific use case. And then if you understand the database well, you will have to adapt the schema. Again, this is a skill that a lot of people lack. What they end up doing is they keep on applying the same normalized schema, independent of which database they are using. So yeah, picking the right database and then designing your schema to adapt to that database and focus on its strength. That is a very, very important skill that you need to have. The fourth skill that I think is very crucial is again a skill that is more on the external side. Essentially, you need to be very clear on the integration pattern for each component. Sometimes you will use GraphQL, sometimes you will use REST. Sometimes you may use subscription-based mechanisms. Sometimes you may use a pull-based mechanism, and identifying the right integration pattern for each component. That's a very important skill set because again, it's a decision that it is very, very hard to reverse. If you build REST APIs and all your front end is now using REST, if you now switch to GraphQL, it's a very expensive change. So how the components will integrate with each other and with the front end, that is a very, very important skill set that you need to perfect. And finally, I mean, this is something that is actually very tactical in nature, but caching is something that I've seen really, really complicate matters. Sometimes people use multiple layers of caching and they have no clue on how it is impacting your cash coherency. People often use cash without really understanding if it's needed, whether it's adding value. People use cash without really thinking about how they will ensure that the cash doesn't become stale. So to build a good cache is quite complex, and that is something that you really need to pick up. At some point or the other, you will end up using a cache, and basically building it correctly is going to be very, very important. So those are the top five in my view, and I'll be happy to listen to any comments you have if I've missed something very, very important.